welcome back, everybody. Next up is Melinda Leslie and Niara Isley. A few brief words about these two young ladies. Known Melinda for the best part of 20 years. Melinda is herself a experiencer. And her own personal experiences has led her down a particularly difficult path. All people that delve into this abductee contactee area, if you're a researcher, if you begin to work with people, do some regressions, do any therapy, eventually you're going to run across some cases and some evidence and some testimony that's going to kind of set you back on your ear, because there is a body of evidence, ever growing, that sometimes when people are tapped on the shoulder, it's not only aliens that are around, sometimes it's human beings also. And strangely, these human beings seem to have our own military uniforms on. So this is getting into a dark area, a deep area, and most of the abduction researchers, when they get this data, they just kind of set it aside. They almost dismiss it because it doesn't fit the preconceived idea we're dealing with. So there is something else going on here. And Melinda's developed most of the last 20 years she's put into trying to find out the truth of this. And then we have Niara Isley, and I met her only last year here at the conference. And I think I might have been one of the first people to which she had the courage to tell her whole story. And it's an amazing one. And she's here to share that with us also. So this is going to be a treat this next 2 hours. Please welcome Melinda Leslie and Niara Isley.
All right, well, I'll see you in a while.
Okay, all right.
Well, I have a lot to cover in a short period of time. And, you know, I could stand up here and give a 4-hour workshop without taking a breath. And so please bear with me. To stay on track, I admit, I'm going to be reading a lot of the presentation, basically, to stay on track. So I apologize in advance for that, but it's the only way I'm going to get through this. And that's the first slide.
Oh, okay.
There we go. All right. My research is the Covert-ops reverse engineering of extraterrestrial abductees. In what may ultimately prove to be some of the greatest evidence for the reality, importance, and meaning of the UFO abduction scenario, extraterrestrial abductees are apparently being targeted by human covert-ops intelligence and/or military agencies. If there's no such thing as ET abduction, then why is this happening to people who have nothing in their lives to warrant this kind of interest by the human covert-ops agencies other than they claim to have experienced an ET abduction? The experiences of harassment, surveillance, and re-abductions suggest that there must be something very important about ET abductions and the abductees, or why all the time, energy, resources, and money being spent. And before I go on really quick, I'm going to say, don't worry about following. I know some of these slides are very, very heavy in text. I do have a book of all my notes combined from about 4 different presentations I've put together. I worked really, really hard on it for the past couple of weeks to really get it ready. And we will be out at the table. Niara has sample chapters from a book she's writing. She'll tell you more about that. And I have the book of my lecture notes, which, like I said, it's combined from 4 presentations. The only way I'd cover everything in that book is if I had 4 or 5 hours to sit up here and talk about it. So again, don't worry if you miss something in here. You can check out the book and read it at your leisure when you want. Of course, we're selling these, but we're keeping the price down for you. So, okay. How many ET abductions are there? Well, the number of ET abduction experiences is higher than you think, and abductions have been going on longer than you know. Many leading abduction researchers have upwards of 500 to 1,500 and more cases each and growing. This includes, of course, international research. Some worldwide abduction research and support organizations have in their case files case files numbering over 10,000 in some organizations. So these are investigated on the books kind of cases. Some members of the abduction research community state that abductions may be happening to as much as 10 to 15% of the world population. I know that number's high, but I've recently heard a couple of researchers say that. The world's population, according to the U.S. Census Bureau website as of beginning of February this year, is over, was it 6,800,350,000 people. 15% of the world's population is 1,020,000,000 possible abductees, based upon those numbers. Even if you take the more conservative view of the 10 to 15%, if you go 10% of the population, you still have well over 680 million abductees. And I don't want anyone to say, oh, Melinda says there's a billion. Please don't do that. I am saying this is what is out there in the research community. These are the numbers that are often given, this idea of 10 to 15%. I just wanted you to break that down into actual world population numbers so you can wrap your head around it. Also, abductions go back to the genealogy of many abductee families, 3 and 4 generations. This is well known in abduction research. Abductees, their kids have it happen, their parents have it happen. Sometimes they know their grandparents have had it happen. To go back 4 generations is now actually commonplace in abduction research. I now know of a case, actually I know of 2 cases going back 5 generations. In both cases, great-great-grandmothers wrote about it in the 1800s. So this goes back in families, and it's been going on for a very long time. There was a Roper poll conducted in 1981 with questions tacked on by Bud Hopkins, David Jacobs, Ron Westrom, Dr. John Mack, and John Carpenter. According to the Roper organization, the total respondents answering yes to the 5 key indicator questions used to determine if someone may be an abductee, and it was all done very scientifically. None of the questions were grouped together. When you answered the questions on your Roper form, you weren't going to know what they were referring to. But you had to have answered yes to the 5 key indicator questions. 2%, and the Roper organization said it was 2% of the sample. 2% of the 185 million adult Americans represented in the poll was 3,700,000. So I took that 2% number and said, that's based on science. That's the Roper organization saying this is some pretty hard science. These gentlemen put a lot of thought into the questions to have it be very specific, and you had to answer yes to all 5. And the chance that you could answer yes to 1, 2, or 3 of them and have, paranormal experiences or something, yes. But to answer yes to the 5 key questions, it was pretty definitive to the kind of experience, specific to abduction. And in doing so, they came up with this idea of 2%. So I took 2% of the world's population. So this is based upon science. This is the most conservative possible number out there. Would mean, if you applied it to the world's population alive today, 136,027,000 abductees alive today. Well, basically, and of course abductions exist around the world. Alien abductions are reported everywhere, South America, Brazil, Russia, all over Europe, all over the US, et cetera, et cetera. Anything happening to this many people, especially something taking place in such a covert manner as ET abductions, would have to be a matter of national security. In the same way that ET abductions are generational, so let me start with the top there. When did covert ops involvement start? Well, in the same way that ET abductions are generational, going back in families, so too are covert ops experiences. I have adult cases that have had covert ops experiences when they were children and were taken by military along with their parents. I have adult cases who discovered their parents had these types of experiences separately from them. So now I'm speaking specifically not to the alien abduction numbers I was before, but specifically to the covert ops involvement. I have 4 cases where the abductees' kids have experienced covert ops experiences, and actually all 4 were taken without their parents present. These were children. Many of the cases have intelligence community connections going back in their families. Many also include family members in aerospace, NASA, covert and secret technology programs. And I just put forth the question, is there a connection? The experiences show that one of the prime reasons for the covert ops involvement is the genetic study, so it makes sense to include families. It has long been understood that genetics is a leading reason, not the, but one of the leading reasons for ET abductions, i.e., for example, the production of hybrids, people being shown their hybrid children, extremely common. Hence, why a covert ops interest? Covert ops abduction experiences go far back in abduction history and may exist in relatively high numbers. From covert ops involvement cases I've interviewed and the cases of other researchers, data has emerged clearly showing that these experiences go back in time to at least the 1950s. I have many cases that talk about, adult cases now talking about when they were children. I have 3 or 4 cases that go back to 1952, that in 1952 they said they had this happen. In a discussion with Kathleen Martin, here we go. I'm going to get a little controversial. In a discussion with Kathleen Martin, co-author with Stanton Friedman of Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience, and she is the niece of Betty Hill, okay? She explained that this case included the Hills having covert ops involvement subsequent, I'm going to emphasize, subsequent to their famous original 1961 abduction. They experienced, the Hills subsequently experienced harassment, surveillance, and a re-abduction of Barney. Researcher, re-abduction not by aliens, but by covert ops or military. Minder scenarios and other elements typically found in my research. Researcher Joe Montaldo, a famous abduction researcher and behind the scenes, but head of an organization called ICAR, after listening to the original regressions of the Hills and reading the transcripts from the original sessions, he made a controversial discovery that their initial experience may have happened in 2 parts over 2 days. One with an ET abduction one day, and the next with actually in Canada with an ET abduction, crossed the border into the US, and then had a military one. He said Barney is adamant in the session tapes and in the transcriptions of them, that he said Barney is absolutely adamant that it was military personnel. Now, I know that's extremely controversial, so I talked to Kathleen about it. She said she does not believe, she's pretty adamant that it did not happen over 2 days. It was one experience, an ET only. Fine. I can sidestep that because then, that regardless, according to Kathleen, the Hills did have subsequent covert ops involvement, with harassment, surveillance, minder scenarios, black helicopters, phone stuff, et cetera, all the things in my research after their subsequent experience and for years following. While reading Witness to Roswell by Don Schmidt and Tom Carey, I noticed many profound similarities between the intimidation experiences described by many Roswell witnesses to abductees' experiences. Covert ops involvement with abductees is a current manifestation and a continuation of an ongoing witness, harassment, and monitoring program that has existed throughout ufology history. It is business as usual. Many abductees have experienced covert ops, even if they don't